Good afternoon. Very quiet. Okay, a big welcome to all of you. Can you tell me if you are first time with us here? Can you raise your hand so I know? First timers here, about 1/3. So 2/3 are old timers. But anyway, for those who have come with us for the first time, let me give a little bit of history of why we are here. In the year 2005, a couple of intellectual friends and business leaders in Taiwan, after a lot of discussion and anxiety about the way the country was going, we were very unhappy with the state of affairs. And after a lot of drinks and dinners and discussions, we decided to do something about it. And to start out a foundation was the result of anxiety and lots of discussion. So friends from the business circle decided to give money, and some professors and university presidents decided to donate their time, and I was ordered to donate my name. So that's why the foundation has my name. I didn't like the idea because usually only dead people get named. But I sacrificed myself anyway. And the purpose of this is actually, we realized that it probably was not right for us to place so much hope on a government or leadership or the political leaders. So we decided to place our hope and devote our effort on the people themselves. In other words, probably the society itself has to be the locomotive of progress. So we decided that to nurture a visionary, open-minded, and responsible young people is probably the real thing to do. And that is why, starting in 2005, this foundation has started out the Thinkers Club, 四沙龙, almost twice a month. You have a forum discussing world affairs. And we also have every other month, we have an English alone salon, where we also talk about global issues. And this international forum takes place about once every 3 months. So please look forward to future events, including in October, we have managed to invite Mr. Yang Zhenning to come together with Zhu Jingwu, two most prominent scientists from the 20th century and today, get together on the same stage to talk about what they think of the world. So don't miss that event. And in November, we also have invited the South Korean ambassador to the UNESCO to come over here and share with us what South Korea is doing and how have they achieved where they are. And I think we Taiwanese are very concerned with what's happening in South Korea. So that's the future event. Behind our idealism, a lot of people have put in their time and work and their heart in making every small thing possible. So I want to just say the names to show our gratitude. Big thanks to Hong Kong TVB. Actually, this documentary was provided by the TVB of Hong Kong. Great thanks to United Daily, to ICRT, to the Landis Hotel of Taipei, to the Hsinchu IC Broadcasting, to Zhonghua Telecom, to the BBC, to China Times Online, to the Zhongshan itself, to Commonwealth Magazine, and especially, this whole series is called the MediaTek series because it is solely sponsored by MediaTek. And last but not least, to make this possible, we depend on 4 personnel, 4 staff members who work long hours, plus about 100 university volunteers. So give them applause, thanking them. Thank you very much. And today we also have quite a number of friends who have appeared here. I just want to say their name to show our appreciation, and I'm sure that you also like to know who is among us here today. We have anthropologist Hu Taili is with us. I'm very happy to see her here. And one of my most respected writers and journalists is here. Zhang Zuojing, Zhang Xianzhen is here. And the publisher and CEO of the Commonwealth Publishing Group, Wang Lixing is here. Okay. On my list was also someone I have not met, but I really like to meet him. Doug Yang, who is the bureau chief of Reuters Taiwan, is here. Hi, nice to have you. 路透社的新闻部主任。Okay, and then we also have the Vice Commissioner of the Taipei Cultural Affairs Bureau, 文化局副局长谢小韵，谢副局长。Nice to have you. Okay. Then we have a number of academicians here with us and who are specialists in the topic that's related today. We also have Dr. 陈树群跟赵峰院长 They are 中兴大学水土保持系系主任跟中央大学地球科学院院长。Where are you? Where are you sitting? Nice to have you. Thank you very much. Okay. And also the Dean of Student Affairs of Tsinghua University, 清华大学学务长贺成红 Dr. Ho He-Chen. Thank you. I might miss some names, but you forgive me if I didn't call your name. Some of them do not want me to mention their name. But there are special people here, I do want to say. Actually, the persons who have been our staunch supporters in our effort to make our young people more open-minded and to be connected internationally, to have a global awareness, is actually 蔡明介 of 联发科 MediaTek. 蔡明介董事长. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And then today we have a very, very special friend of mine, and his name is known all through Taiwan. Not only is somebody who has contributed a lot to the advancement in technology and kind of putting Taiwan on the world map in terms of computer technology, but he's also well known for being a cultural and arts supporter of Taiwan. And for the past 2 years, he has been kind of hiding back in nurturing himself and thinking of a new way of going on with a more beautiful life. But today, in my mind, this is the first time that he's coming to meet a big audience. So for us, it's a welcome back party for him. And he is also the person I have asked him to introduce our speaker, Huang Xiaowen, to you today. And he has been so generous and so kind to say, yes, Yingta, I'm coming out to meet people, to do the introduction. And this is the welcome party for you, Barry Lam, Lin Baili 先生. Welcome back.
Huang Xiaowen， 黄跟王是在广东话同音的，我也很小心。黄Xiaowen没错啊，是我的好朋友，已经10年了。我因为对他的那个探险那种精神很敬佩，所以我就几年前就参加他们在香港的董事会。多了解那个孝文他的想法，但是他这次来做那个引言人发现说他已经把自己引言得很好，我所写的他都全部已经讲了，那我临时想的话，应该找些什么好说的故事跟大家介绍。不过说那个。孝文是 让我敬佩的地方就是说，他为了一个理想，他为了他想做的事情，他会跟你讲半天，都不能让你有有什么意见，他就說哈哈，那個你同意嗎？那他的專業我一定同意啊，因為探險的 project 每個都需要花錢的，不只是探險，不是觀光，像那個 Stanley 去那個 resort hotel，走那個 SPA， 那個有那個 five star， 然後有很美麗的風光，都是它的雪路啊，不是流水的雪了哈，是那個採雪的雪。我也曾經那個去跟他走過雪路，我走到一半，我都投降了，趕快回家，因為這真的是不是人幹的事情啊。那個雪這麼厚，那我們台灣人哈，這個真的是踏不過去的。那是一個香港人哈，能夠有這樣的想法，我就覺得很奇怪。因為香港人，我想在大家的認識當中哈，是那個舞照跳，馬照跑，就什麼事沒有了。炒股票，炒樓，飲茶，不管政治，不愛國家。他完全不一樣啊，找不到第二個香港人，是這樣子的，也跟我一樣找不到第二個香港人在台灣。那不好意思啊，有點自己那個吹噓了哈，因為他真的是放棄了那個1986年是吧？離開那個地理雜誌，回到香港，什麼都沒有，還要搞一學會，什麼都沒有。那你說從什麼都沒有搞一個工廠容易，因為有基金，有那個夥伴就可以了。但是搞一個學會，基金是要靠人家donate的，不是沒有 return 的。那夥伴是要很低薪水，甚至有些是義工，替你做事，而且去中國做這麼危險的工作，而且中國也是當時並不是那個在那個文革的晚期哈，根本中國都只搞政治，根本搞你環保，搞你那個探險，他不知道什麼回事，但是他還是堅持他的理念，一關一關的，像那個影片裡面那麼辛苦的過，所以我想他的精神讓我很敬佩。我唯一在影片裡面哈，我不同意說他永遠是保持三歲的心，3歲小孩子只愛糖吃而已嘛，愛巧克力而已，香港人就這樣。那個，因為我們3歲的時候，這個巧克力是很貴的，台灣。那個，我想應該是30歲吧，30歲。你現在看漢學頭髮很白，而且這是現在30歲，很多那個高科技創業的人啊。去這個心裡，我要去什麼探險什麼地方，要探險什麼，每一個 project 都好像一個新的公司一樣，所以這種精神呢，對，是沒有辦法有 repeat 的。所以我常常勸校園說，你趕快找一個機器人。他說很難。我們高科技還可以找到機器人，我想很多高科技已經有副手，有那個很好的團隊，但是探險這個工作要這麼犧牲的，要沒有收入的，也不會股票上市的，哪裡會有人去給你繼承？我說每天都是替他擔心這些事情。我說，但是我說你雖然是住在一個小屋，不是這個高樓大廈，我去他的小屋。我真的很羨慕他的小屋呢， 那个好像那个鲁滨森一样 ，Robinson 一样。他那天他第一次请我去他家里，我以为那个哇，他住在那个石澳，一定是很不错的一个房子，或者那个开着车子，还开了个船，还到了那个石滩上。我说今天的晚餐在哪里啊？不用担心，他已经钓好了。他的海湾里面就有鱼钓。那今天吃什么晚餐呢？那个蔬菜在院子后面呢，你自己去挑。所以他过了一个与世那个隔绝的，有点可以讲甚至是隔绝的一个生活，但是他拥抱的是大自然，拥抱更大的一个世界，所以让我非常羡慕。所以说，我讲我说龙应台是最关心人类，最关心那个社会。刚那个浩man的话，他是很关心那个动物，很关心那个整个大自然，所以两个是一个很好的对比。所以说这个是我讲那个影片里面没有讲的。所以5分钟我讲完了，我可以招菜了。谢谢各位，祝各位健康。
It's actually time Huang Xiaowen comes up, but I have to admit that I have a problem that I always tend to forget to introduce the most important person. And I really forgot to introduce him. He is soon going to join the army. 很快就要去当兵了，这个人。When I saw him walking in, the first reaction that I had was, "Oh, poor you." Today among us is also the president of Suzhou University, who is soon going to be prime minister of our country. 谢谢刘兆玄教授. He's also here. Okay, warmest applause for Huang Xiaowen, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Professor Long. And it's wonderful to be here. In fact, despite that I've spoken to many groups recently in Paris for IBM and many groups, this is by far the largest audience that I have all these years. Thank you for joining us. Now, it is rare indeed that in Taiwan that I'm asked to speak in English. I remember my first trip to Taiwan in 1989 to give a lecture. Before I go very far into it, my friends at the YPO were saying that, could you please use English instead, because I have a very heavy Cantonese accent. So it's actually, for me, after all these years, having returned to Taiwan many times, actually my 国语 已经过得去了。以前呢，我说话都说我在大陆他们说普通话，我说我只能说普通通的普通话，就是怎么样的。So finally, okay, but for the audience, young audience here, we will defer to English. It is also rare that I go back in history and talk about my childhood and my development years. Today is an exception. This is the first time that I go back all the way to my childhood to bring to you how I evolved to become an explorer and later on a conservationist. So without much ado, can you dim down the lights and we'll move into the lecture itself. Now we will have a Q&A session afterwards. So and at that point, I think Mr. Stanley Yen will be the moderator. So hopefully, if you have any other questions later on, we will answer them. Now, I was born in 1949 in August in Hong Kong. The same year, actually, Lin Baili was born in Hong Kong. Well, you were not born in Hong Kong, but we were born the same year. He's a few months ahead of me. Your president-to-be Ma Ying-jeou is about a year behind me. And I was a small boy growing up, the only boy in the family with two sisters. So I'm used to growing up among girls and dolls around me, and with little male toys. That's my mother and my two elder sisters, both of them in America now. But in those days, Hong Kong is very different from today. This is Repulse Bay in those days. As a child, my father took me there and sometimes rowing the boat there. By the time I'm 5 years old, I would start getting on the horse and learning how to ride. We came from a fairly academic family. My father has been a chemist and then a chemistry teacher all his life. And my grandfather was the comprador for a major German-Danish firm. Comprador meaning the Maiban. So he has 10 wives, so it's a huge family. But my father, being a modest teacher, we live a very much kind of a very modest life. In those days, in the 50s, you can see Hong Kong was like this. Very barren, hardly any high-rise building. The only high-rise, perhaps the highest building, is actually Tiger Balm Garden. And I live right down below Tiger Balm Garden in number 6 here. If you're familiar with Hong Kong, Anson Chan, Chen Fang Anson, he lives one house in front of us. So that's where I'm growing up in the mid-level of Causeway Bay down here. And I went to a Christian school was built right here called True Light, Zhen Guang. They evacuated to Hong Kong after 1949. Just across from our house are many squatter houses. After the war, there were many new immigrants coming into Hong Kong, and they all live in the hillside in these squatter houses. Every year, I remember seeing how big fire engulfed the entire area, burned down these houses that people actually ended up having to rebuild their houses. And those were the days. By the 60s, we were always having shortage of water. The people line up in the street to collect water from the open tap. And that was the kind of circumstances I was growing up. I remember at one time, at home, we get water on the tap every 4 days for 4 hours. So you find all kinds of containers to retain your water for use as I was growing up. But at an relatively early age, I go around with my sister, go out on hikings. I remember this scene going up to Lion Rock, looking down on it. So looking back, I actually developed a liking for the wilderness quite early on, despite that we couldn't afford to fly around to other countries. My family went to Catholic school. I went to an Irish Jesuit high school. Both of my sisters get baptized. That's me in the middle. But I held up for 6 years in a Catholic school by not becoming a Catholic. I always thought into my mind that if I ever get kicked out of school, I can get baptized and they will give me a second chance. So I held back on becoming a Catholic. But fortunately, actually, I never got kicked out. And by 1967, when I was graduating from high school, that was the Cultural Revolution. It started affecting the streets of Hong Kong. They have posters like this that are talking about that the British colonialists won't have a good ending in Hong Kong. That was 1967 when I graduated from high school. Soon thereafter, I went to America. This is when I was at the Hong Kong airport, my parents seeing me off. My father expected me to go into sciences, and I was actually applying into chemistry. But as soon as I get out of sight, and I landed in America, I found out I don't need to be dressed so cleanly. I don't need to have my short hair. First year I was in California, we start growing long hair. And even all my fellow students, this is Japanese students. And within the first 3 years, I was actually in journalism and art school. We lived a lifestyle very much like a hippie. In those days, it was during the Vietnam War. So there was a lot of radicalism. I was going to school at the University of Wisconsin in River Falls. And both the art school and the journalism school are fairly progressive. And I remember this was my self-portrait. I took this picture of myself before I graduated. So we're fairly defiant in those days. I took all my classes to the very last course and took an incomplete and took off. Took off to where? I launched my longest expedition to date, 8 months. We drove from Canada all the way to Central and South America with 2 friends. In those days, Americans are not very well liked in Latin America, so we put on a Canadian flag just to pretend that we are from Canada. It actually has an American license plate. So in those early days, I already learned how to play the trick. Later on, I find it very useful in China, in mainland China as well. Later on, I will tell you, why I found that asking for forgiveness is easier than asking for permission. So we took this van all the way through Central and South America. That was between 1975 and 76, my early exploration career. I published for many magazines. This is some of the old churches in Guatemala. 2 weeks after we visited it, an earthquake basically destructed it. This was 1976. Then I went on backpack. This is probably a few years before Samao went to Latin America. We became friends just the week before she committed suicide. So we backpacked all the way into Ecuador, into Peru. My hair was longer than the one that they depicted up there back then. Then riding the freight train all the way up to Machu Picchu when there was not many visitors to Peru in those days. But backtracking, before I went on my South American expedition, I took my first trip into mainland China. Growing up in a Catholic school in Hong Kong, we know very little about China. The history that we get to study barely ends before the Opium War of 1941. So it was in America when I realized what it felt like to be a minority, let alone finding out about my own heritage, being Chinese, and Chinese culture and history. Earlier the film said, I flunked geography all the time. I'm more inclined to make geography than to study geography. So I started putting my first foot into mainland China in 1974, at the tail end of the Cultural Revolution. This is the first slide I took as I entered China in Shenzhen. There was a huge political poster. On this slide, I marked it A1. At that time, I was going all the way to Beijing and to the northeast, to Dongbei. And I thought, just using one alphabet, A to Z, would be quite enough for my career in China. Never thought that, now with 3 alphabets and 250,000 slides later, I'm still working in China. And at that time was soon after the opening of China, just opening up a bare crack, what we call ping pong diplomacy. The ping pong team from America, from Japan, from Australia all went in to play sports games, just like the coming of the Olympics now. So at school, they always perform ping pong. You go to Tiananmen Square, there's hardly anybody there. Old cars, few cars around. Tiananmen, hardly anybody. Tourism is a word for capitalism. So, there's hardly any tourists in China in those days. You can see even the Great Wall, such an important relic, was in disarray and very much in ruins in those days. And everywhere you go, you see the statue of Mao. And students like your age, be it in the last years of high school or in college, were sent down to the countryside to help in the farms rather than continuing their education through years of college. So I see a lot of turmoil in those early years of China. Shanghai, which today, of course, is a booming city. The ships there are very old, junks, and even ships like from the 1940s were all still in use by then. Now, very quickly, however, I developed a huge interest of Western China. If you draw a line on mainland China's map, perhaps only 40% in the coastal area, this part, is the Han area. The western part, 60% of the land area are all Tibetan area. And the Uyghurs here in Xinjiang. Xinjiang itself is 1/6 of China's land area. The Tibetan Plateau is effectively 1/4 of the land area. So I focused my work in those areas for the National Geographic. One of my early expeditions took me to Hainan Island. Besides being rural farming country, the Li people, some of them even use the nose to play their flute, they're quite wise. Most of those songs are for courtship. So if you can imagine how little air can come through your nose to play the music, the lady has to sit very close to you in order to hear it. Now, there are also the Li people with these huge earrings that is getting very obstruct them when they go out to the farm and work. But then it actually, you can put it up on your hat and use it as a hat to shade your head when you're actually working. Now, these were all in the, like 25, 30 years ago, not to be found anymore. Now, my article for the National Geographic became a 52-page article that shows about the culture and geographic diversity of China. And I also spent time along the Silk Road studying Islam in 1984 under auspices of the National Geographic. Along the Silk Road, looking at some of the old traditions there, how they weave carpet, weave silk, and the different ethnic group. There are 10 ethnic groups in China that are Muslim. These are the Kyrgyz people at the border of Xinjiang. Then also that how they raise eagles to go out hunting as groups activity. This is community activities using these giant eagles to go hunting. I got on the Pamir Gaoyuan, bordering Afghanistan and Pakistan, where I stay with the Tajik people, the only Shiite Muslim of China, a Persian-based dialect. And I joined a wedding, and as part of the wedding, they have this very interesting polo game. It's called Bushkashi. You can see under the lake here is a sheep. So the point of the game is to pull away from each other, trying to grab the sheep and put it at a designated spot that will be proclaimed the winner of the game. But the game is so violent that they tug at the sheep. At the end of the day, you have many pieces of it. So there are many winners at the end. This was the bride. And actually, she became gracing the cover of one of my books called Islamic Frontiers of China. It was published after my 1984 trip for the National Geographic. Of course, now Islam is becoming very popular, a lot of attention in the world, and we're going to republish this book next year. But that was published in London 20 years ago. And we took the Islamic exhibit to Malaysia at the National Museum. And at that time, the Deputy Prime Minister, Anwar, he was a younger man then, came out and gave a speech and opened the exhibit. It became front page headline news in the New Straits Times. So when Islam, when you put it in the right place, suddenly the attention is different. It will be rare that you put in an exhibit in a museum and can get front page news. But then Islam for Muslim in Malaysia is extremely important. So it's really depending on where you play out your field, then you can get the right attention and get your right message across. Now, in my National Geographic years, the ultimate expedition is the one going to the source of the Yangtze. We have major preparation in place. We brought in our own boat. That was 1985 to 1986. We followed the Yangtze River from Shanghai upwards, and studying industry, farming, the fishery along the river, including the three gorges. At that time, the first dam was being built. And after the dam was built, when I was further upriver inside the gorge, I can see here the level of the water in 1981 gets all the way up to this level. And the person is this tiny down there. So if you're talking about the dam project, that so many people has talked about the degradation of the environment, the migration of people. Under normal circumstances, when the river floods itself, it also goes to this kind of level anyway, which is 129 meters. Okay, so a lot of the debate we talk about in an unusual year, we get that much of our land flooded anyway. And when you don't have a dam to control flooding down every year, you're going to be dealing with the same situation over and over again. We look at many of the wildlife, the giant China sturgeon that needs to be protected, the Yangtze alligator, which is a case of a very healthy comeback. When we studied them, there was 500 remaining. Now there are over 5,000 of these Yangtze alligators. And even river otters that the fishermen used to catch fish. This is a dying culture. After long years of search, around 3 years ago, we found only one family knowing how to do it. So you can see with the change of lifestyle, the change of policy, many of these traditional and very old culture are dying out. And here is one of the boat going upriver. And we thought that, you know, we can use our inflatable boat and go up. Within one day, we wrecked 3 engines. So we decided that we should give up on the boat, and we instead go in my car and go up further upriver. I remember at the time I have 2 American Chinese as my assistants, and in Yunnan we saw all these patches of hemp, ma. So, you know, they use these to harvest and make clothes and ropes. 做这个麻要来做很多的衣服啊什么。And soon my American assistant were harvesting them and put it in front of the car, and they can actually use it to smoke them too for a different effect. You must have read that the inventor of LSD just passed away at the age of 102. So apparently, all his life he's been testing on this, and still get pretty old age. Now, when the ultimate goal is trying to get to the source of the Yangtze. And in order to do that, we have to pack up on all our gear, gasoline, and going off-road. This is off-road situation crossing the upper Yangtze. Every day we get stuck all the time. If you're lucky, you use a power winch or your other car to pull it out. Most of the time, both cars are stuck. So you actually have to dig your car up. And that was, of course, 25 years ago. I was much younger. So, however, digging at that altitude, 4,500 meters, is not an easy work. Even in the summer, in August, every morning we have frost on the ground. And at night, the horses has to have blankets in order to survive the bitter night. And this is the mountain behind which we have to cross over to get to the source of the Yangtze. After 3 days off-road, we discovered that we don't have enough gasoline to get back to the road. So we pitched tents and move on foot and on yaks. We're able to hire 4 yaks. One of them is tame enough to be ridden. So every hour, the 3 of us has 20 minutes on the yak to ride towards the source of the Yangtze. I remember when it's not my turn to be on the yak, I'm walking here, I have to think out a strategy such that the next time when we're crossing the river is my turn on the yak. You can see the glacier melting water down here. If you have to cross on foot, it's going to be icy cold water. Finally, we get to the glacier source. This glacier is 12 kilometers long, this one 9 kilometers. I have to climb higher than the glacier to get a perspective shot. The melting water of the Yangtze at that time was believed to be the source of the Yangtze River. And we get on to the ground. This is the riverbed, which is all ice, melting water, collected water sample for analysis. But at the same time, by 1985, we were heavily using NASA's satellite data. And we looked at these data from space and found out beyond these 2 glaciers that you just saw, this one here, down here, there is actually another further source that we can define. So we spent a whole month on the plateau to try to seek a longer source of the Yangtze. This is one evening with the Tibetan nomads. The next morning, it was like this. So the climate on the plateau changes all the time. We ended up renting a number of horses, like a dozen horses. We rode for 9 days, back round trip, 5 days out, 4 days back. Every day we deal with snow, hail, and rain. Nowhere to hide. You're just out there camping out in the snow. This is summer on the Tibetan plateau when you get to that altitude. These are some of the nomads that help us. Finally, we found this upper reaches of the Yangtze called the Damchu, and with the nomadic help, points us to it. We ride on, getting up to this ridge. Behind this ridge is the Mekong River headwaters. This one coming down is the Yangtze. And eventually getting to this little puddle after traveling from Shanghai for over 6,400 kilometers. And of course, as you saw in the film, I sank to my feet and drank from the source of the Yangtze River. And afterwards, I published a book, a CD-ROM, that took many awards. But the debate went on. China at that time was still quite political. For foreign Chinese, overseas Chinese, to discover the source of a new source for the Yangtze, it doesn't go down very well. So the debate goes on for another 10 years. So by 1995, I brought in a second team that included many Chinese scholars, geographers, scientists, and we went back to the source to define it. By then, we have newer cars flown in. For the work, we have GPS, Global Positioning System. Now, having GPS doesn't mean you don't get lost. It's just that when you get lost, you know where you are. You constantly get lost. And we have compression chamber. If you have mountain sickness, you put yourself inside it, pump it up and change the pressure, add some oxygen, then you're like flying an airplane. Despite having all these new cars, you get stuck all the time. That's the usual thing. And you can see how hazardous this bridge is, trying to cross it. To safeguard ourselves, we bring in a monk to chant and pray. And in order to bless the next car, we make sure the walkie-talkie sent the chant away to this following car. Now, my first Yangtze trip, my longest record of not having a bath was 29 days without a shower. So when you can imagine how nice it is when we are next to a hot spring by the river. So early in the morning, before anybody can see us, we sink in to take our bath. Not until later on in the day, we found out up above us, that's where the Tibetans wash their carpets and all their horse blankets. So I was down there using second-hand water. A friend made a solar shower for us, tub for us later on, so we can actually have no excuse not to take a bath anymore. And that trip took us, in those days, now this is 1995 now, when we get back to the source a second time, I brought a book along. This Tibetan young guy came around and said, hey, that's my father. He has grown up already. And then we finally took this picture, each of us with 1 foot on each bank of the Yangtze. So you can imagine for a Chinese to have 1 foot on each bank of the Yangtze, where in Shanghai it's 30 kilometers apart. That's quite an accomplishment. Now, this is the day when we get back to our base camp. The next morning is like that. Something just never changed that high up. So this is just one night apart. And of course, with all the maps now, we define the source of the Yangtze more accurately with drawing in all the little details. Now jump forward another 10 years, 2005. 2004, I was in Wisconsin, in Green Bay, out in a farm with a friend from NASA. He works for 美国太空处的 NASA. Inside this farmhouse, he has all kinds of equipment, taking down satellite and all kinds of remote sensing data. And with those data from the space shuttle, which we have used since 1981, we used these data that's make covering of the Earth and found ancient sites along the Silk Road. We have made excavation using these radar data and found old archaeological sites. And on that trip, I was trying to use the same data to find lost airplanes from the Second World War in the Himalayas. We know where they are. We want to make sure they're still there in order to go in and make an exploration of discovery to recover those airplanes. But at the same time, I told Martin, I said, you know, while we are at it, I want to go back to the Yangtze source for our 20th anniversary. Can you bring down some recent images? Let's have a look at the source area. Now, this is 20 years apart, so the technology become much better. Far more detail can be seen. When he brought down this image of the upper Yangtze, the source we went to in 1985 is up here. Then suddenly I see this tributary coming in from here, which is quite a bit longer than the source I discovered 20 years ago in 85. Now, why is it that we didn't notice this tributary before? The images I used before was from the space shuttle. It covers this area very well, all the way to here where we make the discovery. But right below us is cloud cover, so we were not able to see another tributary. With measurement on the computer, we determined that there's a longer source than the one I claimed to have found in 1985. So by 2005, we launched a very large expedition with all kinds of sciences represented, anthropology, doctors, NASA scientists, and we went pursuing a new source. First, we make a stop at Litang, the home of the 7th Dalai Lama, where he was born. There's a Rinpoche here, but his ancestor was the 7th Dalai Lama. So hoping that, you know, we'll be blessed along the way. Later on along the way, when there's a major rock slide that we have to cross, this is the Yalong River, we again got smart and asked a monk to walk it first, such that, you know, you feel safe to cross it afterwards. We do a lot of camping out, and that's our campsite. even Land Rover sent along a mechanic to help us repair our cars, and when we move along, we have an anthropologist who actually did a lot of field work in Taiwan before. He was a student of Margaret Mead, got his degree from Columbia University, now a very famous lawyer. And this is Dr. Bill Bleich, one of the premier wildlife biologists. We have a NASA scientist along to help us. And then we have a Tibetan doctor that helped give optical tests to the monks and the nomads. This particular set of glasses, we were using it for experiment. It's invented by a professor in physics from Oxford University. In very remote areas, you don't have optometrists. But with this set of glasses, you can self-adjust your prescription by putting in silicone gel in between the glasses. So then after you get a correct prescription, you cut off this, then you have a perfectly well-prescribed glasses. We were the one that tested 300 pairs of these in the nomadic area. We have to cross river and ice fields, and we get to the headwaters region, and if we get there, we have 14 tents set up, 24 of us. Every day we were waiting and drinking tea and coffee, because by then, 2005, that's only 3 years ago, the plateau has changed a lot. In those days when we used to be able to easily find horses and yaks to carry loads, these days everybody's on motorcycle. So the horses are roaming out free. Even if you can get them, they're not tame enough to be ridden. And China simply has changed a lot, even in Tibet. So we're all just waiting out the time. Finally, after 2 days, we gather together our yak to carry the loads and horses to move forward. The yaks are mainly for carrying loads. This is as we are moving again a third time to the Yangtze source. This is our team moving in, always dining, cooking outside. Every morning, frost on the yaks as well. And the source is a very beautiful area. And finally, we followed this new tributary that we are trying to define, getting up to the hills. But as we get closer and closer to the snow, we find that the whole hillside has water coming down. At last, the horses cannot go any further. We dismounted and walked the very last bit. The further you go up the hill, the more water there is. This is like a whole hillside of water. And finally, we have no choice but to find a melting ice hole and put our GPS reading, the longitude and latitude on it, and define that as the source, new source of the Yangtze from this tributary. We, of course, open our champagne, but it's never as sweet as drinking directly from the glacier water from the source. On our way back, I remember a certain philosophy comes to me. While that, for the government, who's quite political still, they consider the old source from 20 years ago still the official source, because they have a tablet put there. Jiang Zemin has his writing inscription on it. I call that the political source. For the local Tibetans, they have the traditional source, which they think spiritual, which is the one they point me to in 1985, our new discovery. So that one is for them a spiritual source. For us, this is the scientific source. So I figure that, you know, for the locals, you have one important source. For China, there's another one, and for the rest of the world, a third one. And they're all important. In fact, you know, just in life, everything is interrelated. And I finally get settled with that philosophy that, you know, we can all share having all those three sources. And one is scientific, one is traditional, and one is political. So I learned to live with that. By the time we get back to the camp, all our nomads helpers all has these glasses on by now, looking at the weather changes. This is the night when we get back, the next morning again. So 3 times on 10 years apart, always, you know, the snow catch us right after our run to the source. But soon they melt and the rainbows start coming in. Omega even make a special watch with the latitude, longitude, and the time as we discover this new source of the Yangtze. Now, that is perhaps one of the highlights of my exploration career. I go back a little bit in history about how I evolved from an explorer to a conservationist. On one of my National Geographic expedition, winter 1983, I went to Dongbei, in the old days called Manchuria, Heilongjiang. the very northern part of China, riding a train up there. We're exploring the tiny minorities called the Awenki. The tribe has only 166 individuals remaining. They live in like Native Americans, teepee-like houses, and they are hunters, nomadic hunters. This is a horn they blow on to create the sound of a mating deer, so they attract other deer to the hunt. And this is the only group in China that raise reindeer, and they travel around as a nomadic hunting group. But with logging coming in over the last 30, 40 years, all their lifestyle and culture has changed. Even little kids learning how to smoke a cigarette and cut down trees at an early age. What they use as traditional objects, birch bark, that can make entire canoes out of, are no longer there. So we ended up very concerned about the vanishing culture. Fine, I think with modernization, a lot of them will be lost. But how can we document it? How can we preserve part of it? In fact, we're very fortunate. Last month when I was in Switzerland, Omega agreed to make a new watch for our society as a limited edition. And they're going to use these birch bark boxes as the watch box to commemorate these kind of tradition. So we have to bridge the gap with the business for them to use these kind of material to keep it alive. In practical use, it's far more easier to go into a shop and buy a container than to making these birch bark containers. But there are other options too when we are creative in thinking. This is the last woman shaman that we get to document, a religious person. So many of these were vanishing, and that triggered that I feel several things changed in my life after that trip. I decided, besides being a writer and photographer, document dying culture or nature, I have to do something that's a little bit more proactive. I also started videotaping because photography cannot record the music, dances, religious rituals, so I started making film as well. I left the National Geographic in order to pursue this, is conservation in remote China. We went back several times now to document this particular small tribe. And we all start looking at indigenous culture, like Tibetan monasteries. In 1981, when I visited Shangri-La, this is what is remaining of the entire monastery. Despite today that is very nicely rebuilt, a lot of things are not up to par. You find a religious revival throughout the Tibetan plateau. New buildings coming up, many of them rather than using wood are using cement. Some of the old buildings where they are leaking on the roof, they will put cement on it, but without care and letting it drip down on ancient murals. Old murals that are disappearing, they will just paint over it and make a new one. But the new method cannot compare with many of the old skills of paintings. So we brought in teams, experts from the West. And we did in 1981 survey 18 surviving monasteries, including some very large one and some very small one that has exquisite murals. But inside the murals are all cracking and breaking up. We need to bring in help, let alone learning how to fundraise. It happened that in 1989, I already was living in America with my new society. And after Tiananmen, all support for any work in China evaporated overnight. There's just no funding available. And that's the same year I landed in Taiwan and gave lecture at the invitation of Jiang Yanshi at the time. He introduced me to Dr. Li Guoding, who at that time was running the Jiang Jingguo Foundation. Now, for many of you who are familiar with them, that was a desperate time for us. We were really eager to get something going to preserve this monastery. And the Jiang Jingguo Jijinghui came through twice, supporting us in the most critical years in supporting those projects. In fact, as most of you know, Dr. K.T. Lee, we became very close friends. He started off changing Taiwan from agriculture to industry, from industry to high tech. Before he passed away, he was already looking into the future, that beyond the high-tech age, people has to move into culture. We have to use our resources and support culture, and that's what the Jiang Jingguo Foundation was supporting. And quietly, they supported our work. We moved in an Italian team going into this monastery. They teach the local Tibetans how to clean up these murals piece by piece, checking out some of the murals and testing how to remove them from the wall in order to fix the building. We use a small piece just to test it. Then we bring in special expert from Italy, remove entire murals from the wall. put them into storage, rebuild the entire roof such that it's no longer leaking, then clean up the murals and reaffix them onto the wall. These are very intricate Italian methods that were brought down to Tibet. And later on, during an earthquake, another part of a huge monastery fell apart behind our murals that are important. Now the Tibetan students can move in, take off these murals themselves. You can see how happy they are after they got their job done. So many of them is not just bringing in funding, the right expertise to help, also is allowing the young people, the younger generation, to sustain that kind of work with the right spirit. Earlier, you saw the film about the nunnery. This is a picture taken from the 1920s, a huge complex. By the time I saw it in 1992, there's only one building remaining, this one. So when we moved in, it used to have this kind of a roof, which is traditional shingle roof. And it was very shabby. I put a GPS on it. Everything is broken down. The murals are falling apart. There are 12 murals inside. And the nuns were always eating and staying outside in the corridor, nowhere to stay. So we'll move in. The government moved in some money and changed it to a very nice tile roof, but it's too heavy for the old building, so the whole building was sinking. You can see behind here, Terrace Hill. We organized work to dig in and clear all this area and build eventually. This is our team moving in, our design team, and with local helpers and Tibetan carpenters, we start building, organizing the nuns together and dig into the backside of the hill, eventually finishing up 4 dormitory buildings for them, including kitchen building. And then the last few years, we moved in a team to did the architectural conservation and the mural conservation. Now the place is very much alive, and we consider our job done. So this is when we finish our work with the dormitories. There's another monastery. When we first visited in 1991, it was very well preserved, exquisite murals. It survived the Cultural Revolution. We thought we can bypass it. Later on, we found out that huge mudslide is going towards it. We're not experts on building dams, but we brought in the right expert. We built 3 dams, retaining walls to divert the water. So now, at least, this old monastery is safeguarded for the next probably 20 years. We can't get the job done forever. That's why the next generation is important. We are only in answer to our own our generation's responsibility. But the next generation will have better resources, better educated, and better skills than we do to continue such work. This monastery happened to be the head monastery for the special envoy of the Dalai Lama, which I talk a little bit about later on. Now, on my Yangtze trip, we also saw these hanging coffins, and we saw them at different sites along the Yangtze basins, and many of them has fallen down. Prior to our research work in 1986 onward, the Chinese scholar said the oldest one they can find are from the late Ming Dynasty, around 400 years old. We found a new site with 7 coffins. With my caving team, you saw in the film we have a caving team, we can get close to them and see. You can see in this coffin, 2 of the beams are supporting it, the 3rd one is already displaced. So if this one gonna fall down, it's gonna bring down all those below it. And there's no time to wait. So we move in, put the scaffolding, get into site, open up the coffins, did an archaeological work, check the DNA, carbon-14, the entire sciences. Then we place all the supporting beams with new wood, such that they will be up there for at least another 20 years until people like your generation come and help. So people always ask, well, how can they do it? How can they put them up there? We've tried several methods, very simple method, be it a scaffolding or just a 3-point pulley system, we can get them up there. It's not as difficult as most of us would think once you actually put your hearts and mind to it. So that's one of our projects. Now with the cranes, you heard a little bit in the film. We also have been working on that for something like since 1988. It's the rarest crane on the Tibetan plateau. We studied their nesting ground. Sometimes they get orphaned because traditionally some nomads go to the nest and steal the eggs. So the crane will give birth to another pair of eggs. But if they get hatched too late, they cannot catch the right time by October, the migration season. They're still not full grown to go through the long migration. So they sometimes get left behind. This one later on we put in the zoo for 1 year and try to release it the following year. But human imprinting is too hard already, so she simply would not fly off from us. Then we have programs to feed the cranes during the critical months of the winter and go into schools to talk about how important it is to preserve them. Bring students out to the field to observe cranes. For the farmers to bring in the sick crane to be saved. We make several documentary films so that this news can be disseminated. We bring in bird watching groups from outside such that it becomes something that is quite active, not just writing in books. Outside our center in Shangri-La, in the summer it's the wetlands, but in the winter the wetlands are frozen. That's when the migrating birds start coming in. Then when they are flocking in, we built a small center as a bird watching place. Inside is exhibit about the wetlands and the cranes and other migrating birds. And we use that as an education center. And nearby is our main center, which is contributed to us by Lin Baili. And we usually have programs there throughout the year for students, including Taipei American School has sent a team of students out, 15 of them. When they come, we bring in even like the United Nations ambassador to China to explain the role of the United Nations in China, the different aspects of it. So we have students group visiting those areas. Now, I would go a little bit into the wildlife conservation part. When I used to work on the plateau, there's a huge abundance of wildlife. These are wild ass that we can go real close to and photograph them. Tibetan antelope, zhang ling yang, which became a very controversial issue because of the chartreuse trait, the peijian, and you can get close to them easily. On my first Yangtze trip, my guide killed one, shot one, took it to a festival and eat it. Everybody feasts on it. And the skin, they just put it aside and don't use it. But by the these are the wild yaks. In those days, huge herds also exist that darken the entire horizon. And then by the 1990s, a lot of gold miners come into those areas. They bring with them guns and they shot a lot of these animals. And especially the Tibetan antelope because they are used for the chartreuse shore. That people pay $5,000 to $10,000 US for a piece of shore. And these are confiscated of the skins by the police. Now, as an explorer, we were eager to find out where the antelope migrate to give birth. This picture was taken in 1992 by a colleague of mine, a newborn Tibetan antelope. And for over 100 years, explorer cannot find where the antelope migrate to give birth. Through this picture, we followed that in 1998. My whole team got to that point and finally saw the huge herd of Tibetan antelope, around 7,000 female, converging to give birth over a 2 to 3 weeks period. Everywhere you go, they were giving birth. But at the same time, the poachers, the hunters beat us to it. This group has 37 of the pregnant female killed. So we move in and film it, the antelopes. Every year now we send a team back to protect these antelope. And we nurse some of the orphans and trying to, in the future, be able to keep them in captivity. We put that news on CNN, BBC, ABC, such that the world knows about it. Usually it's women who use these. That's why it's important to analyze the situation. We consider that women are the prime user, and most women are motherly. So when they see the killings field of pregnant female being killed, it's very disgusting, so they don't like to use it. Number two, they found it's illegal. Number three, if you pay $10,000 for a show and can't show it off and have to hide it, I think the market will dry up very fast. It's certainly not the case of the Kekashili, just a few macho guys going in with their guns and can patrol a size of a quarter the size of China. It's really by critically analyzing where the problem is, use the minimal resources in achieving the most out of it. Now, since then, we go back and see a very healthy recovery of the calving ground with antelopes now. Every summer, we have a team going back there. These are the bear on the plateau. They attack our car and pull out 3 of the tire caps. But another animals on the plateau is the wild yak. One killed can be the size of this. This is over 100 years ago. So they weigh up to 2,000 pounds or 1,000 kilo. And when we run into wild yak, single wild yak, these are bulls, they always turn around and charge at us and attack us, trying to go after our car. Now, why is that? The single bull, this is something that I want to talk a little bit more. Usually, the single bull are those that lost in mating battles when the male fight to have the mating right. The young ones coming up, each year challenge the king of the bull. They may not be strong enough to beat him. But as the former king become older, finally, he lost the battle. When he lost face and lost the battle, he left the entire herd. The young ones will stay on. So those are the single bulls. Now, this is highly endangered, so it should be protected. But if you're looking at the situation, like pandas or golden monkeys, a single bull is not going to contribute to the perpetuation of the species. Instead, actually, if you use them to mate to domestic yaks, they grow very well. Now, this brings us into another issue, the nomadic area of Tibet. Livestock has always been the mainstay. Yaks, there are 13 million yaks on the plateau, almost 2.5 yaks to each Tibetan. The traditional thinking is that if you have 20 yaks, grow it to 30, 40, 50. Today, each yak costs around 2,000 renminbi. So if you have 50 yaks in your family, you have basically 100,000 renminbi walking your ground. So always they want to grow the livestock in numbers without realizing that they use the yaks for caravans, moving things. They pull their wool to make tents, weave things, rugs and tents. Those are the yak hair tents. They even use their fuel, the yak dung, as fuel for burning, making their milk, cooking, and everything. This is sheep's dropping that will fire up even more. So they use every part of the yak. So considering that, they use their milk to churn it into butter, the soyo. But the soyo is very strong in smell, very rancid, so you can't market it very well. And that's what is being done. And it becomes a matter of overgrazing. When the livestock get larger, if that's the economic tradition, then the pasture get degraded. The capacity, carrying capacity is not there. So how are you going to help? On the plateau, we're always talking about samofa, becoming like desert. The solution is to cut down on the numbers of the livestock, return higher value for these animals. And what we brought in is we set up a cheese manufacturing plant. We brought in professors from Wisconsin, teaching them, experimenting to use yak milk to make cheese. Cheese can easily return 10 times the value of butter. Let alone after making cheese, the remaining part can still make very nice butter. And same with the fiber, the yak fiber. If we're going to sort out the fiber, use the finer one to make shawls, to make sweater. Now, one of the social enterprise group working with us can make yak shawl and sell it in America at Neiman Marcus for $900 US each. For a nomad who wants to sell the meat, you can raise the yak to be 10 years old, but you're wasting 8 years of grazing. By 2 years, they're full grown already. So it's when to slaughter them. So by returning higher value to the livestock, you can cut down on the numbers, such that the grassland will remain healthy. If you have a lot of livestock, the children don't even have a chance to go to school. They will be just shepherds all their life. So we have to turn the traditional value around and telling to them that, hey, having fewer livestock but with higher value is the solution to many of these. Now, because of time, I only talk about one more project. We start looking at a situation where we're trying to conserve nature, conserve culture. But what if, let's say, we're trying to conserve an animal while the group living there is a hunting tribe? Their culture hinges on all aspects of hunting, their legends, their history, their songs, their manhood. So we have to find ways to balance out all these, the interest groups. So we start looking at issues from many angles. I use this as a last example, how we integrate multidisciplinary projects. There are many sacred mountains on the plateau. This is Mount Everest, which, the torch is supposed to go up there these few days. This is Chumulari, bordering Burma, another sacred mountain. Ani Ma Ching in Qinghai province. This is the most sacred of all Tibetan mountains, Kailash, Ganrenpuche, in western Tibet. Even the Hindus goes here. In 2002, that's the special year of the horse, everybody goes to Kailash. There were around 400,000, 40万的藏族. They all ran to Kailash to circumambulate it. Many of the pilgrims come with small children, old people also come around. It's like a tent city at the foot of the mountain. Every day you find pilgrims going on this circumambulation around the foot of the mountain, 53 kilometers, from 4,600 meters to 5,600 meters at the pass. You can see the long line of people going up to the pass. So for me, it took me 2 days, a lot of hard work to get through 53 kilometers at that elevation. On the first day of my trip, 2 ladies died. One was only 28, one was 60 years old. Because many of them are ill to start with. Some of them, after the long journey, got ill. Others bring little kids or old people. There's no medical facilities. So when we get to the pass, we did our pilgrimage that year. The next year, the next mountain bordering Yunnan and Tibet, called Kawakabu, that's the special pilgrim year, the year of the sheep. This Meili Sheshan, they will come circumambulate this mountain, takes 2 weeks. We figured that many people would come, Tibetans, and many will be ill, and there's no medical facilities. The glacier comes all the way down to the Mekong River, Lanchangjiang, and very spectacular mountain there. The starting point is this little monastery, and there's an old bridge that people cross that has not been repaired for 25 years. So first thing, we repair all the steel beams there. We change all the wood and put in railings. We built a clinic and a tea house there. So we put a team of volunteers and researchers there. There's a clinic with 2 Tibetan doctors there. Every day there were people stopping by for treatment. You can see in China, any minor problem you have, they put the syringe on you, the IV. So you can see these used IVs all over the place. Then pilgrims come around, we talk to them, and we serve tea. The tea house serves tea. After a long journey, they enjoy sitting down to have tea. At the same time, our Tibetan scholar, Western scholar would interview them. Imagine for 20 years, I have to go very far away to do my interview and research. Now the whole plateau comes to my doorfront. Everybody comes over. We can study about religion, social economics, wildlife, anything you want, even health, hygiene, health. So at this one spot where we're serving tea, we collect all the data we want. So we're doing a clinical service, serving tea to all these pilgrims. And every day there's a huge gathering there. And they were also playing cards. The cards were actually, these are poker cards made by students of the Hong Kong International School. On each card of the deck is an endangered animal of the Tibetan Plateau. So truck drivers and young people, we disperse these poker cards to them. When they go home, while they're playing, they learn about these endangered animals. So with one site, we fix the bridge. We have the clinical service, we serve tea, we collect research data, and we disseminate conservation message at the same time. Over a 6-month period, at the height in October, the clinic have served 4,600 some cases, and we served over 27,000 Tibetans just in the month of October. So you can see how we integrate several projects into trying to answer a problem. As I said, I'm an explorer. I don't want to be a repairman. One advantage I have as a conservationist is not that I'm more skillful, not that I'm trained for conservation, but usually I'm a few years ahead of the problem. It gives me the chance to put in a management plan. I honestly believe conservation is not an end in itself, it's management. Managing well for equitable use, be it for appreciation or for resources. So if I'm an explorer making the discovery a few years ahead of the problem, I see that potentially it's valuable, it can become a problem. We try to find the resources, put in a management plan before it becomes a confrontational, something confrontational. Usually conservationists see a problem, and by the time they step in to intervene, it's very difficult to balance all the different interest groups. So I think as an explorer, I do have one advantage in that. Now, I know that time is running out, even though I have a lot more to say. But I certainly, you know, as a tribute to Long Ying Tai, who invited me here, I encourage many of the younger generation, today I see a lot more young people here, is to go beyond Taiwan. I came from tiny little Hong Kong. I have no choice but to look beyond. And I think, you know, mainland China is the most easiest one. Western China, I call that the backyard of China as well as the backyard of Asia. In the future, that's where a huge area to explore, to contribute your time, let alone with using that as an experiment ground, setting up models. You can go beyond to other parts of the world. We are branching out some of our projects to Burma, to Myanmar, also to Vietnam. You know, we have, now that we consider, in conservation, both nature and culture don't respect political borders very well, okay? So, you know, now we can bring a lot of our message and our experience to countries beyond the mainland China as well. And thank you very much.